Chapter 300, Raizakia 6. Bonus image. Eugene felt death drawing closer and closer, but it was still okay. He could still move and he could still fight. Eugene ignored the darkness and the redness encroaching on the edge of his vision and moved forward. He was already quite dizzy, and the unintelligible screams and begging resounding inside his head only worsened it. "It's fine," he grumbled as if intending for them to hear it. In truth, he wasn't fine. It was quite obvious. The bones of his arms and legs were broken. Even so, he could replace his legs with levitating magic, and he was still capable of holding his sword with his hands. He had already forced the dislocated bones back into place as well. He knew he risked severe aftermath without proper first aid, but what did that matter when his life was at stake? He knew that even serious residues would disappear like a lie with a few good smacks on his back from Christina and Anise. The wound on his waist was quite deep. He had already stuffed his intestines back into the wound and sizzled the area, but the pain still remained. But that didn't matter either. It wasn't as if the pain coming from his side was the only pain he felt. In any case, his body still moved well and his flame was unwavering, burning as bright as ever. He was filled with power and he was capable of swinging his swords. His mana flared violently and tried to devour everything in his surroundings, even without Eugene's conscious commands. That's why he couldn't waste a minute or even a second of his precious time right now. Eugene saw the fear in the black dragon's eyes. It felt surreal. He couldn't believe that even the arrogant, maniac black dragon could show such an expression of fear. Was it because of the moonlight sword? Because it was a sword belonging to destruction? Or was Raizakia just afraid of him? Eugene wasn't particularly curious. On the contrary, Eugene felt rather flustered to see the black dragon with such an expression. He wanted the black dragon's arrogance and insanity to persist. Eugene wanted Raizakia to despise humans without reason. Eugene had slain countless demons and strong adversaries with the same mindset in his previous life. Those who believed themselves to be superior and special tended to rely wholly on their own strengths. They were bound to slip and show weakness because they were unwavering in their superiority over their enemies. Such enemies were easy to hunt. Even if their attacks failed and even when they were driven into a corner, they raged in dismissing it all as being mere coincidence or attacked in anger over having their pride shattered. Thankfully, Raizakia had acted similarly earlier. But now, uncharacteristically, there was fear in his expression. It was difficult and troublesome to hunt such an enemy. It was because they had abandoned the arrogance of the strong and accepted the slyness of the weak. It was quite evident. Earlier, Raizakia denied his emotions and attacked Eugene with all his might to protect his pride. But now Raizakia no longer denied what he felt. He was taking steps back, retreating. "Don't run away," spat Eugene once more. It was meant to provoke Raizakia. Eugene hoped that the black dragon would once again resort to attacking in hopes of protecting his self-esteem. Had his voice been inaudible? Raizakia continued to step back. No, it couldn't have been. Even if it had been quiet, there was no way that Raizakia missed it with the heightened senses of a dragon. "Are you afraid of me?" Eugene laughed, his lips curling into a twisted smile. Raizakia's eyes quivered at Eugene's words. A millennium-old ancient dragon. The black dragon, the strongest of them all and the first to fall. One of Helmuth's 3 dukes. "Raizakia, you who consider humans to be pathetic insects, are you afraid of me?" Raizakia could not find the words to respond. He wanted to deny Eugene's words with a scoff, but even at this moment he was continuing to take steps backward. "Keep running if you are afraid," said Eugene, his bloody smile distorted. "Qua!" Raizakia roared, along with an eruption of dark power. Running away never suited him in the first place. Raizakia attempted to deny Eugene's words as he stomped forward. The scales covering his arms were the first to undergo transformation. Raizakia blocked Eugene's advance by swinging his arms, which had transformed into sharp blades. However, Eugene did not bother to swing his swords in response. Prick. The flame surrounding Eugene's body became mixed with lightning, and the bolt of black lightning easily crossed over the obstacle. It was a speed far beyond imagination. Raizakia attempted to erect a defensive barrier in shock, but the holy sword and the moonlight sword cut down the barrier with ease. Just before the swords reached Raizakia, the black dragon retreated into the air. Draconic was a power that allowed the transformation of anything into magic. I think it's a little laughable to discuss the depths of magic with you, a dragon, but Raizakia, how should I say this? Well, your draconic is... Should I say it's a little inadequate? Well, I'm talking about your imagination. After all, draconic or not, it's still trapped within a cast of magic. The mocking laughter and words of the profligate vulgar night demon circled his head. There was nothing special about her except her oh so wonderful great eyes. In fact, if the two of them battled with their lives on the line, there was no way he would lose to the night demon. But what? Someone like you who only relies on dreams to attack dares? He was on a different level than her. His scales would sprout anew when broken no matter how many times, and they could neutralize most attacks. He was immortal. He could destroy an entire nation with a single poison breath. He possessed power superior to any living thing or being. In the end, you betrayed your own kind out of fear. The only thing you obtained from corruption was lengthening your life. And even if you devoured the dragon heart of the Lord, aren't dragons a race filled to the brim with mana in the first place? What else? You transformed your mana into dark power? Unfortunately, Raizakia, the power you gained from the fall isn't so great compared to your days as a dragon. Instead, you have lost your honor. I can't believe you speak of becoming the greatest of the three dukes. I will pretend I didn't hear you. Raizakia remembered the emotionless gaze that peered down at him. Did the small creature really think he was a sword just because he held the title of Blade? He wasn't a great existence but a worm from birth. He was just a parasite who relied on the Demon King. Just a traitor? Do you really think that you can look down on my power? The Demon King of Destruction, who had always looked down from his throne. He had slain countless dragons without a single change in his expression. Even after a dragon corrupted himself and bowed before him, the Demon King had always remained indifferent without betraying any emotions. The Demon King of Destruction was no more than a collection of mysterious materialization of ominousness. Even though Raizakia had fought against him, it was impossible to even know what the Demon King looked like. The Demon King of Destruction had been an existence seemingly created by shaping menace into reality. They were the only ones who could stand on equal footing as himself and look down on him. If he were ever afraid of something, it would be... Gasp. The weapons were stopped before his neck by an indiscernible distance. Eugene's weapons were swords of definite length, but the radiant flames and moonlight made it impossible to measure their reach. Although the thick overlapping scales covering his neck had been destroyed, his head was still intact. Raizakia knew that there was no significance in losing his head. He knew that he could regenerate his head as many times as he wanted, but still he did not want to get cut. Even if he survived, the memories would accumulate, as would his fear. He was afraid he would never open his eyes again when he lost his head and thoughts. Dark power collided with Eugene's flame, but a burst of moonlight quickly severed the two forces. Raizakia desperately resisted all the attacks that came at him and attacked Eugene. However, Geddon's shield rerouted all of the dragon's attacks into nothing, and Eugene boldly redirected the attacks that he failed to block with the shield. His body became riddled with many more shallow wounds. Even so, he did not stop. The collision was never equal, for Raizakia was always the one who was forced to retreat with each meeting. It was the same now. No, rather, it was slightly different. This time he could not retreat. The rampaging strikes restricted his movements, and his arms had been lacerated to shreds. His scales, which were supposed to be harder than anything else in the world, had been torn like paper. Just a little bit more. Raizakia thought as he saw Eugene beyond the broken, fluttering scales and the black, poisonous blood. Eugene's lips were bloody, and even at this moment he was vomiting large amounts of blood. The bones of both his arms were sticking out once more from overexerting them. Just a little bit more. Surely he could sever the human's arms completely if he pressed him a bit further. Or perhaps he could kill the human entirely. Just a little bit more. Eugene shared the same thought. He continued to shred the scales off the dragon and cut down everything in his way, including the dragon's arms, legs, tail, and dark power. Eugene could see the terrible state his body was in. His arms were tattered and were close to ripping apart, unable to withstand his power. But strangely enough, Eugene felt no pain. From a certain point on, he could no longer feel pain. He didn't know if his mind had broken or if he had numbed himself to pain to keep himself from breaking. Just a little bit more, he thought once more. He was driving the demon dragon into a corner. A little more. If he took one more step, he could kill Raizakia. There were no unexpected variables like before, and he wasn't going to make a mistake either. Raizakia's dragon heart would be located somewhere inside his body, and if he cut the dragon's entire body into pieces and destroyed it completely, he would crush the dragon heart in the process as well. Then everything would be over. Q. Blood spewed out of Raizakia's mouth. He had suffered a large wound, a cut to his chest that reached far too deep. Raizakia hurriedly created a tail and wrapped it around his chest. However, it was useless. A flurry of deadly strikes ripped his tail to pieces, and the fluttering flame grew closer to him. He lost his hands as he raised them to block the moonlight and the flame, and they regenerated too slowly. Raizakia opened his mouth wide in response to the devastating blow that was already upon his chest. He squeezed out a breath and it worked as a shield. The devastating blow was briefly interrupted by his breath, and Raizakia jumped back in fear. He knew his breath had been insufficient to offset Eugene's attack completely. After the very brief interruption, the strike continued on its path after splitting apart Raizakia's breath. In addition, a sphere the size of a fist rose into the air where the breath had been split. Rumbly. The scattering remnants of dark power were absorbed into the sphere. Flips. Raizakia didn't know the name of the horrific attack, but he knew how terrible it was from experiencing it several times. He recited draconic spells, causing dark power to bind under a powerful, firm will. Dark power that was controlled and bound by magic could not be absorbed by eclipse. Block, tear, break, burst, and disappear. Raizakia's words caused an eruption of dark power. Magic blocked the explosion of eclipse. Raizakia was exhausted and he was swept back by the remnants of the blast. What was this disgrace? Raizakia braced himself after rolling several times on the ground. He didn't even have time to roar in anger since the monster wouldn't miss this opportunity. However, the attack he expected never came. There was no ominous light of destruction, no black flames, and no hypocritical brilliant light. Nothing came for him. What's happening? Raizakia staggered to his feet and looked ahead to where he had unleashed his breath, where Eclipse had come from. He saw Eugene lying there. What was happening? Raizakia couldn't immediately comprehend what was happening in front of him. He could not believe his eyes. The human who had been attacking him like a demon, the ghost from 3 centuries past, was on the ground in front of him. Was he playing a dirty trick? Perhaps the human was pretending so that Raizakia would let his guard down. Perhaps he would attack the moment Raizakia approached him. It was entirely possible. Raizakia gulped as he glared at Eugene. He heard a sound. He heard the sound of a heart beating and the sound of death's approaching footsteps. The clear, loud sound of the human's beating heart. He could hardly hear it now. It was extremely quiet, as if it would stop at any moment. Ha. Raizakia's lips twitched into a smile. Ha. Ha. Ha ha. The human had run out of strength. The inhuman power, which had been too great for humans to handle, had finally run out. This was only a matter of course. In fact, it should have happened earlier. With his broken body, the human should have fallen earlier. Raizakia laughed maniacally while shaking his head. Eugene could hear neither the laughter nor the screaming coming from inside his cloak. The only thing he could hear was the words playing over and over inside his head. More. Just a little bit more. Sir Eugene, Sir Eugene. Wake up. You must wake up. It sounded like Mare, but Eugene couldn't quite understand what she was talking about. Why was she being so loud? If he knew this would happen, he would have chosen to leave her behind. Where was Raizakia? Was he dead? It felt as if Raizakia had been on the brink of death. Had he killed him? Was it over? Sienna. He placed his bloody palms against the ground. He didn't remember when he had collapsed, but he could not fall yet. However, his body wasn't moving very well. He couldn't feel the blood circulating through his body. Was it because he had bled too much? Was it because his arms and legs were like rags? Or was it because his cores were broken? Raizakia flinched and froze when Eugene attempted to stand up. However, Eugene ended up falling back to the ground in his attempt. Raizakia's lips slowly twitched into a smile once more, and he started approaching Eugene. I have to protect him. Mare was still connected to Eugene. Unfortunately, unlike when she was in Akron, she didn't have many tools at her disposal. In her current state, there wasn't much combat magic available to Mare. She saw Raizakia approaching Eugene and she opened the cloak with a gasp. Even if there was nothing she could do, she couldn't let Raizakia continue approaching Eugene. It would have been over with just a little bit more. No, but it wasn't over yet. If she could persist for a little while, then Sir Eugene would rise once more. Mare believed so. A terrifying, appalling wave of dragon fear washed over Mare. Even though she was formed from magic, it felt like her body would be torn to shreds. Even so, Mare did not lose grip on her consciousness. She desperately resisted and attempted to leave the cloak. However, something grabbed her wrist, then pulled her back. It was Rhaenyra. Her face was white and her eyes red from all the tears she shed, but she vigorously shook her head towards Mare. What are you doing? Don't stop me, shouted Mare. No. What can you do? Asked Rhaenyra. Before Mare could express her anger, Rhaenyra crawled out of the crevice of the cloak. Heek. The first thing Rhaenyra noticed was the stench of blood. Then she saw Eugene, who was as broken as he could be. Rhaenyra cupped her hand over her mouth to stifle her scream, then staggered to her feet. She wanted to check Eugene's wound and help him, but Rhaenyra quickly realized that that wasn't an option for her. She turned her head towards the source of her frantic fear. Aye. It's been a long time, father. I know, the black dragon. Rhaenyra did her best to smile, but her lips didn't move as she wanted them to. The best she could do was to quietly stammer her words. Her head hurt. It felt as if the red jewel in her forehead was squeezing and crushing her brain. She couldn't remain standing, so Rhaenyra collapsed while clutching the jewel. Even so, she did not close her eyes and she did not turn her head. Rhaenyra stared at Raizakia while shedding tears of pain and fear. Please, oh black dragon. See, could you not spare this human? This human can no longer threaten you. Rhaenyra, called out Raizakia, his eyes bent into a smile shaped like a crescent moon. However, his smile did nothing to reassure Rhaenyra. Instead, her trembling only intensified. Why yes. It's me, Rhaenyra. The only flesh of the black dragon. I did my best to protect the dragon demon castle in your absence. And I came here to save you. Please spare the life of this human. For me. I'll let me brand him myself and take him as a slave, stammered Rhaenyra. Come here, Raizakia said with a chuckle. My daughter. Your voice is too small. I cannot hear it. Heek. It was a mean, frightening remark. Unable to stand up, Rhaenyra got on her knees, crawled and pushed herself forward with both hands. Please, oh black dragon. Please spare that human. Raizakia reached out to Rhaenyra with a smile in response. Whoosh. His outstretched hand changed in appearance. His arms became a large long neck and his hand became a huge head. The dragon opened his maw wide and attacked Rhaenyra. She did not have time to scream or run away. The dragon's head was upon her in a moment, and it swallowed her whole. You exist for me. Raizakia raised his arm with a bright smile. Gulp. The dragon's neck wobbled and it returned to a hand and an arm. Do not worry, my daughter, I will not digest you here. I have been looking forward to something else from even before your birth, said Raizakia. After escaping from this sickening place, he would have his daughter birth an army for him. He would have her lay as many eggs as possible, then devour her when she was no longer useful. With a smile, Raizakia turned his head towards Eugene once more. However, the smile disappeared from his face immediately. It was because of a truly insignificant being standing in front of Eugene. She was a familiar created with magic, but her face and appearance were truly unpleasant and abhorrent for Raizakia to look at. The familiar looked just like Sienna Meridian. Give her back, Mare squeaked. Eugene had not gotten to his feet yet. The stupid kid you swallowed. Spit her out right now. What was that pathetic familiar talking about? Spit her out. Was she commanding him? Raizakia stopped in his place, but only because he was dumbfounded. And don't come any closer. If you come any closer. If you come any closer. And what? Said Raizakia. He slowly raised his finger and pointed at Mare. What on earth can you possibly do? Rumbly. A storm of dark power washed over Mare. She stretched out her hands with a scream. The defensive barrier she prepared could not stop the storm of power even for a moment. The barrier was shattered and Mare was thrown back. You're just a pathetic familiar in imitation of your master. A true insect inferior even to humans. Yet you stand in my way and dare to command me? Indeed, it's hard to laugh when something is so ridiculous, spat Raizakia, glaring at Mare with his crimson eyes. He had not killed her, for he had a better idea. It would be far more entertaining to rip off the familiar's arms and legs and throw it in front of Sienna Meridian. But he would kill Hamel. Right, he didn't know if the wench would recognize his new face, but he would chew it all up and devour everything apart from his head. Don't come any closer, cried Mare, attempting to stagger to her feet. But she could not. Her legs had been completely torn off. She didn't feel any pain. As a familiar, she felt no pain. However, it felt as if her heart was breaking. Mare crawled on the ground while swallowing her tears. Raizakia approached Eugene with joy. He wasn't dead yet, but he would die soon. He could hear the human's heart growing fainter. He needed to hurry up. He would devour the human before he was completely unconscious. Raizakia reached for Eugene with a grin. Suddenly, a ray of light descended, parting the darkness and dividing the space into two. Raizakia was blocked by the light and unable to advance any further. This is... His eyes filled with shock. He had experienced one unbelievable thing after another, but now something truly unbelievable was taking place. A figure slowly descended in the light that pierced the darkness, and the light pushed away the darkness after making contact with the ground. Eugene felt the warm light with his fingers. A little bit of energy returned to his body and he raised his head. I thought you were going to come to save me. So what's with your current look? Her mauve hair fluttered. But the arch-wizard placed her hands on her waist and looked down at Eugene after stepping on the ground. So I came to save you first, Hamel. It was Sienna Meridian, and she smiled with eyes moistened with tears. Chapter 301. Raizakia, 7. It had been hard to see. His line of sight, which had been eroded by black and red, was suddenly illuminated by the light. Eugene looked up at Sienna's face without saying a word. Is this a dream? He could not understand. Sienna was sealed in the world tree, and there was no way for her to come here in the gap between dimensions. Eugene had failed to kill Raizakia. He had pushed the black dragon to the brink of death, but he had run out of energy first. So how was it possible for Sienna to be here? She didn't have a single wound on her, and her expression was one that Eugene knew all too well. A face that made it hard for him to discern whether she was laughing or crying. How was it that she was here staring at him? Are you surprised? She asked with a bright smile. When she pointed her finger towards him, the light that surrounded her was redirected towards Eugene. Whoosh! The light enveloped Eugene. It was a warm, gentle light, and it penetrated deep into Eugene's twisted, broken, scarred, and dying body. Eugene could feel precisely how the light permeated deep into his vessels, rejuvenating them as blood, how it glued each fragment of bone and how it wove the torn muscle fibers. Ha-ha! A burst of clear laughter resonated in Eugene's head, or rather throughout his entire being. He could clearly see the light that once again illuminated his sight. The light that permeated Eugene wasn't the light of the divine power but rather the light of the pure spirits. It was the light of the world tree, the same light that prevented Sienna's death and protected her and the elves for hundreds of years. His body began to heal, and it wasn't just limited to external injuries either. His broken organs, including his heart and his cores, which were utterly destroyed as a result of using ignition twice in a row, were restored by the light of the world tree. Eugene could no longer taste death in his mouth, and he no longer stood on the boundary between life and death. The irresistible despair had already disappeared, and the black and red that filled his sight was completely dispelled by the light. What's happening? Stammered Eugene. Although his body was healed, he still couldn't understand what was going on. Sienna wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, then passed Eugene with a brisk step. Can't you tell? She asked. Eugene could see Raizakia behind the veil of light, unable to advance any further. He was attempting to break through the light with disbelief on his face but failing to advance even a step further. His path was blocked by the spirits of the world tree as well as Sienna's magic. It's me, Hamel. Sienna Meridian. Her voice quivered ever so slightly. She continued forward after passing Eugene, then stopped right in front of Mare. The familiar was on the ground, broken. Her small, frail body had been broken by Raizakia's dragon fear and the magic he used to intentionally break her. Sienna lowered herself and brought Mare's small figure into her embrace. Fortunately, I'm not too late, Sienna muttered while quietly restoring Mare's magic. imbuing mana into the helpless familiar. Lady Sienna? Mare was still conscious. Although she couldn't move properly and could not speak, she opened her eyes and saw a miracle. Sienna smiled in response and stroked her cheek. You worked hard. Lady Sienna. Lady Sienna. Yes, yes. Mare buried her face in Sienna's chest and bawled. Sienna raised herself and returned to Eugene, holding Mare tightly in her arms. Eugene's fully recovered vision allowed him to see Sienna clearly and accurately. It was truly a miracle. Her existence in this place could not be called anything else but a miracle. Sienna's current form did not possess a body. This Sienna in front of him was a spiritual existence created by her soul and the light of the world tree. It was destiny created from the conditions, Sienna explained. Raizakia connected this space with the forest in which the world tree resides, creating a path. And right now, Hamel, you are here with Akasha. The necklace Eugene wore was a relic of his previous life, and it contained Sienna's magic. In addition, Akasha was originally an artifact created for Sienna to use. It was I who found you again, Hamel. Hamel, you did it for me. You stupid dumb fool. It was because you were running wild without thinking about your life and pushing that dumb, shitty lizard against the corner. And it was because you were about to die again, said Sienna. She slowly stretched out her hand and helped Eugene to his feet. Eugene staggered up, then looked down at Sienna. Sienna took a deep breath, then raised her fist and gently tapped it against Eugene's chest. I couldn't just watch. That's why I, Lady Sienna, came here to save you just in time, continued Sienna. Technically speaking, the light that rescued Eugene wasn't Sienna's power but rather the power of the world tree. But was that really important? It was Sienna's soul that brought the light of the world tree upon this darkness, and it was only possible because Sienna had longed to save Eugene. Thinking so, Sienna gave a confident smile. Then she turned her head to the side. Raizakia, the demon dragon, her adversary of centuries, was glaring at her with bloodshot eyes while shouting something. His breath and dark power were causing the light that separated the two sides to quiver. It's too dark here for us to celebrate our reunion, grumbled Sienna, then lifted Mare, who was still buried in her arms. Mare, I am not complete enough to fight while holding you, so... But she gave a light kiss on Mare's cheek before continuing, go to Hamel. Why yes. Mare barely managed to clack her jaws together, then wriggled into Eugene's cloak. Sienna fixed her hat, then turned and faced Raizakia. Ehem. With a small cough, she reached out to Eugene. What is it? Asked Eugene. Staff, she responded. Sienna was still unstable in her form. Her body was still sealed in the world tree and most of her mana was contained within it. Although she had manifested herself in this place by a miracle, she had already consumed most of her power to block Raizakia's advance and heal Eugene. However, if she could use Akasha, she could still fight even in her incomplete form. Recognizing this, Eugene handed Akasha to Sienna. It's been long, muttered Sienna with a bright smile. Her words were directed to Akasha, which she had touched for the first time in hundreds of years, and to her friend whom she was fighting along with for the first time in centuries. How's your body? Can you move? She asked. It's a lot better than before, but honestly it's not moving great, answered Eugene. He had been brought back from the brink of death. His heart had been made whole, his broken limbs mended and his organs restored. However, even after the miraculous recovery, his body did not move as well as he expected. But it moves, right? That's enough for now. And I'm only going to say this once, but don't use ignition. If you do, I'll make sure to prioritize beating you up, said Sienna. Do you think I used it because I wanted to? I used it because I had no other choice, retorted Eugene. That's why I'm telling you not to use it from now, said Sienna, raising Akasha in front of her. Rumble. Raizakia's breath penetrated the light that was separating the space. But the scattering light gathered in front of Akasha according to Sienna's will, forming a magical shield and blocking the breath. I'm by your side, Hamel. He wasn't alone. Right now he was by the side of Sienna Meridian, the only wizard capable of fighting a dragon or a demon king. Sienna smiled, revealing her white teeth, and Eugene gave a hollow laugh in response. You're not even in perfect shape, said Eugene. He could feel the tip of his fingers quivering finely. However, he could dispel such things by slightly tightening his grip. Once again, Eugene took the moonlight sword and the holy sword in each hand. With his mind clearing up, he could once again make the connections between the blurs of his memories. He remembered how Rhaenyra, the Dragon Duchess, had chosen to walk out of the cloak, tears in her eyes, and stood in Rhysakia's way. And, if this lady is swallowed by something, then I will take you out of this something's jaws. It was a conversation they had shared only a few days prior. Even until that moment, Rhaenyra had refused to admit that the something was Rhysakia. However, it was clear that Rhaenyra would have had a hunch. She would have known that her nightmares were foreshadowing a definite future, as well as what the source of her nightmares was. The red jewel embedded in her forehead would have shown her a glimpse of Rhysakia's thoughts, engraving into her mind and body how she would be used by Rhysakia. Even so, Rhaenyra had voluntarily stepped out of the cloak, standing between her father and Eugene. She had refused to let Eugene and Mare die. She's still alive, Sir Eugene, said Mare. I know, responded Eugene. Rhysakia had given birth to Rhaenyra only to use her for breeding. He had planned to make her lay eggs continuously after allowing her to mature. As such, Rhysakia had swallowed her whole instead of chewing. Rhaenyra was still alive inside Rhysakia's stomach. That was a promise, said Eugene, glaring at Rhysakia. Everything had been over. Hamel's frightening flames had died, and his body had met the rightful fate of an insignificant human. Rhysakia could have finished everything if he had taken just one more step forward. Unfortunately, he had failed to take that one step. He first prioritized swallowing his child, whom he felt not even an ounce of warmth towards. He prioritized destroying the insignificant familiar, an existence even inferior to humans who dared to stand in his way. Sienna Meridian, roared Rhysakia in anger. Sienna had been given a chance to materialize because of the delay in his single step. Are you attempting to unleash your magic before a dragon? In your incomplete form? He could clearly see that Sienna's existence was incomplete. The power of the World Tree was allowing her to materialize in this place, but what could she do with that less than perfect power? There was nothing she could do. There could be nothing she could do. Rhysakia raised his hand as he ground his teeth. You should not have come to this place. You should not have shown your incomplete self before me. Do you really dare to think you can stop me in your current state? You cannot. It is impossible. This was only a matter of course as well. Hamel's wounds had recovered, but he would not be able to fight like before. Rhysakia saw that Hamel's mana was not flowing like before. In his current state, it would be impossible for him to explode the mana in his heart and his core. Indeed, whether he failed to take a single step made no difference. It had simply been delayed. Rhysakia was not out of strength yet. The Lord's dragon heart he consumed 3 centuries ago had empowered him with more dark power. Moreover, if necessary, he could deprive his hatchling of her power. You must be scared, right? Whispered Sienna. My existence must be a nightmare to you. Do not get ahead of yourself, human, snarled Rhysakia. I have the right to act arrogant in front of you, don't I? I was the one who imprisoned you in this pitch-black darkness. Rhysakia, you're no dragon. You're just a cowardly bastard. You tried to kill me and rob me of Akasha when I was mortally wounded, retorted Sienna. Even Eugene had been unable to use Akasha until he was granted ownership by Sienna. However, Sienna could use Akasha even after giving ownership to Eugene because Akasha was a staff that was exclusively created for her. Rhysakia had coveted Akasha. He had desired to kill Sienna to take Akasha as his own. You could not tolerate my existence, Sienna said with a sneer. Akasha wasn't the only thing you were obsessed with. You were obsessed with me. I, a human, was a greater wizard than you. You could not tolerate my existence, which was why you came to kill me at my weakest moment, right? When Sienna came to the Samar rainforest, she had not been in possession of Akasha. At that point in time, Akasha had been enshrined in Akron. Even so, Rhysakia searched for Sienna, and he came to the land of the elves to kill her. Sienna smiled and wiggled her finger. Rhysakia, do you know what I thought when I discovered your name? You're a coward. A coward who didn't want to die. A coward who was so afraid of the Demon King that he betrayed the dragons. A coward who is complacent with being a duke. A coward who is too afraid to challenge the Demon King even after being corrupted from a great existence. A light appeared from her wriggling finger. A storm of mana began to form around her ethereal form. It was eternal whole, the epitome of the circle's magic formula. The mana that poured out of Akasha drew an infinite trajectory in Sienna's eternal whole. I admit it, Raizakia. You can kill me anytime. You have the power. Even so, you cannot best me when it comes to magic. You didn't come to me because you knew this truth, did you? That's why I call you a coward, said Sienna. It was a remark not worth refuting. And yet, how did it find its mark deep inside his heart? Raizakia shook with anger and humiliation. He stared at the infinite trajectory of the whirlwind in Sienna's chest. He had heard of the eternal whole. After the war, the human wizard was said to have settled in Arath, inventing the circle's magic formula to greatly develop human magic. The epitome of magic she developed after studying for only decades. Was that? He could not admit it. Raizakia attempted to understand and grasp the eternal whole, but even he, a dragon, could not comprehend the infinite trajectory formed inside it. Qua! Raizakia kicked off the ground with a roar. If he could not understand it, he would destroy it. There would be no need for comprehension once he destroyed all traces of it. I must have had it right on the dot for you to get this angry, giggled Sienna before turning to Eugene. Eugene mimicked her smile while raising the holy sword and the moonlight sword. Let's go, Hamel. A whirlwind of magic appeared around Sienna. Chapter 302, Raizakia 8. Sienna's wind enveloped Eugene. It was a familiar, nostalgic sensation. 3 centuries ago, Sienna would often wrap her wind around Hamel during battles. The wind served to protect Hamel from the magic of the enemies while allowing him to fight more freely. Hundreds of years had passed since then. He had experienced death once already, and he now lived in a new body after reincarnation. However, at this moment Eugene thought that nothing had changed. He was now Eugene Lionheart and also Hamel Dynas, and now Sienna Meridian was by his side. Right. He raised both the holy sword and the moonlight sword in front of him. Let's go. The power that allowed him to push Raizakia was already gone, and he could not use ignition again. Moreover, he had to be cautious, ensuring that prominence would not go out of control. Given that the flow and the output of mana in his body were unstable, using the empty sword or eclipse didn't seem like viable options either. Raizakia looked to be in better condition. Although Eugene had cut and crushed the dragon's scales, Raizakia had recovered from most of the damage during the brief respite he was given. While he might be weaker than before due to the expended dark power, it was evident that Raizakia was in a much better state compared to Eugene. As such, Eugene wasn't in a particularly advantageous situation. Even so, Eugene felt no foreboding sensation of defeat. Raizakia could feel the shift in atmosphere as well. The change was quite palpable. Just a moment ago, Hamel's eyes and expression had betrayed the despair he felt. Throughout their extended battle, the despair had never once left Hamel's side, even during moments when he held the advantage. It was because Hamel had sensed that the tides of the battle could turn at any moment and that death was an inevitable end for him. But now there was not even a remnant of the despair from earlier. This changes nothing, Raizakia thought. Absolutely nothing. He reminded himself once more. The dark power surrounding Raizakia began to boil and erupt, giving birth to a flash of light in the midst of the powerful energy. Don't worry about the magic, reassured Sienna, raising Akasha in front of her. Countless circles appeared in the infinite, intertwining loops of eternal whole. The circles divided, intertwined, scattered, and divided repeatedly. The most optimal operation of mana for the circle's formula. A resulting amplification of magical powers. An efficient simplification of formulas. An omission of incantations. Division of consciousness to allow for multiple castings. Storing magic in the unconscious for later use. Those were the advantages of the eternal whole that Mare had outlined in the past in Akron. And although Eugene had created the ring flame formula by combining the white flame formula and the eternal whole, even now he could not fully comprehend the eternal whole. It was even more difficult to understand now that he saw it in person. The mana that Sienna emitted in her incomplete spiritual state was faint and weak. However, the magic she conjured wasn't weak at all. Fush. A sphere of fire appeared in front of Ak. It was simple magic, a spell of the first circle that was widely used. Fireball. However, the fireball that Sienna conjured exuded an absurd level of heat. It simply could not be considered an attack of the first circle. Dozens more fireballs appeared in front of Akasha, and they formed into a huge wheel of flames as if they were one entity. The fire wheel began to rotate, and the raging heat started to accumulate within the wheel instead of spilling outward. Boom. Dark power poured out of the darkness that surrounded Raizakia. Countless magic attacks swept through the space, attempting to devour Eugene and Sienna. At that precise moment, the heat contained in the Wheel of Flames was released, blocking the dragon's magic. The spinning, flaming wheel began advancing towards Raizakia. Eugene kicked off the ground without hesitation. As the Wheel of Fire ripped through the dark power, it created a gap for him to exploit. Eugene charged into the space, then swung both his swords. However, he was slower than before. It was easily avoidable. Raizakia raised his hand while stepping away from the trajectory of the twin blades. The arm of the dragon grew in size and dropped towards Eugene's head as a giant, blunt instrument of death. However, his attack was caught midway. Sienna had secretly conjured a magical restraint that seized the scales covering Raizakia's arm. Before he could shake off the restraint, the holy sword severed his arm, and the moonlight sword dug into his chest. Quaff! Raizakia roared while forcing his body to warp with dark power. He hastily underwent a transformation using polymorph. Crack! The moonlight sword's light was fainter than before with Eugene's decrease in power. Eugene had failed to pierce all the way with the moonlight sword. However, he did not attempt to drive the sword further into the dragon's chest but instead pulled it out without any hesitation. He could fight confidently and with surety because he wasn't alone. Dozens of lights sparkled behind Eugene. The sparkles of light passed Eugene like fireflies and reached Raizakia. Were they fireflies? Insects? Unfortunately, the figures of light that penetrated Raizakia's chest weren't as trivial as fireflies. Rumble. The sparkles of light exploded after settling down, sending Raizakia flying backward. Q. A dragon's scale was immune and protective against most magic. However, the bullets of magic had found their mark in the gap between the scales and struck their roots. Even if Sienna's magic was superior to Raizakia's, the inherent advantages he possessed as a dragon made it impossible for him to die from a magical strike. As such, Sienna could not kill Raizakia. However, this wasn't a problem right now since she wasn't alone. 3 centuries ago, the 5 of them had been powerful because their powers were in perfect harmony. If it was impossible to kill something with magic, they would cut it down with a sword. If they could not cut it down, they would beat it to death. If it was impossible to beat it to death, they could purify it with light. If they could not purify it, they would find another way. In this regard, Eugene and Sienna were capable of producing almost a similar level of harmony as they did with all 5 of their group present 3 centuries ago. Although neither of them was an expert in divine magic, they had the Holy Sword. What they lacked in power with the Holy Sword could be made up with the Moonlight Sword. Moreover, they even had an archwizard who could look down at even a dragon. Raizakia was experiencing firsthand what this represented. It was difficult for him to fight, and the battle wasn't going the way he wanted. He could not dictate the fight. If Eugene had pushed him with overwhelming force earlier, now the 2 humans were literally dismantling Raizakia. It was hard to pierce a dragon's scales with magic. As such, Eugene would first cut down the scales with the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword. Sienna would follow up with her magic, penetrating into the lacerations and causing the scales to explode from their roots, tearing the dragon's flesh and causing blood to spill. Then the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword would take over once more. Raizakia did not stop resisting. However, his defensive magic was weakened by the continued barrage of attacks. On top of that, his attacks were cut short by magic. He felt appalled by the devastation surrounding him on all sides. The 2 swords blocked the close-ranged breaths he unleashed before they could even cause any damage, and he was reduced to a flailing fool when both his arms were blocked and deflected repeatedly. Each and every one of his actions was being met with restraint. He could neither advance nor retreat as he wished. What could he do? Before he could think of an answer, Raizakia was flung backward. The left side of his body felt empty. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 different spells had impacted him, robbing him of his left arm. This was impossible. Raizakia's eyes quivered. It took too long for his arm to regenerate. The sword of destruction was upon him even faster than his arm could regenerate. With a desperate scream, Raizakia swung his right arm. The scales of his right arm were wiped clean by the moonlight. Sienna knew that the light of the Moonlight Sword inherently rejected magic. As such, she didn't place her magic right behind the Moonlight Sword but instead ensured that it hovered around Eugene, keeping pace and protecting him. "I missed this," Sienna whispered wistfully. The various spells circling around Eugene simultaneously fired toward Raizakia. His left arm, which was in the process of forming with new flesh, scales and bones, was destroyed again. However, Sienna's magic did not stop there but proceeded to infiltrate into the stump of Raizakia's left arm. Impurities formed in the black dragon's blood. Clumps of Sienna's mana had transformed and reduced to minuscule sizes like invisible parasites, poking their heads into Raizakia's vessels. She dares. She dares. She dares. Raizakia gnashed his teeth while unleashing his dark power. Did the wench think she could taint a dragon's blood with such meager magic? In response to the dark power, the impurities in his blood were burnt away. Boom. However, the action resulted in an explosion beginning from Raizakia's left shoulder. More explosions followed, causing the black dragon's scales to scatter from the inside out. The moment Raizakia had unleashed his dark power, the conditions for Sienna's magic had become completed, sticking to the dark power and causing an explosion. The power of the explosions wasn't great. Even though the explosions had taken place inside Raizakia's body, every aspect of a dragon was resistant to magic, including their blood, bones, flesh, and scales. But it didn't matter if Raizakia was still alive. Sienna had achieved her purpose of creating a gap. Raizakia knew this as well since the internal shock caused him to stiffen. For a brief moment he was unable to move his body as he wished. Although it was a very short moment, it was more than enough time for a seasoned warrior to wield his sword dozens of times. It wasn't as if Eugene had been told to swing his swords at this moment. The two of them had not even shared a glance. But this was something they had accomplished thousands of times. As such, Eugene stabbed the holy sword and the moonlight sword toward Raizakia without hesitation, with an instinctual tacit understanding. He couldn't dodge it. This could kill him. Would he really die? What about his body? It still wasn't responding to his will. Defensive magic? No, it would be too late. There was only one thing he could do. The ancient demon dragon found the only choice he could make in this critical moment. The moment the two swords pierced his chest, Raizakia's body started swelling up. As a result, despite the two swords having completely penetrated his chest, the strikes ended up being too shallow. Raizakia had chosen to abandon his human form. He had released polymorph and returned to his draconic form at the last moment. Even so, he had failed to completely avoid the attack. Although shallow, the two swords had still penetrated his chest, and the strike resulted in damage to his dragon heart. Quaaga! Raizakia released a bellowing scream. He attempted to rise into the air by flapping his tattered large wings. Eugene pulled the swords out of the dragon's chest. "Are you sure that's the right choice?" he scoffed before kicking Raizakia in the chest. Fush! A storm of dark power was unleashed from Raizakia's wings, but there was no need for Eugene to defend. Sienna's magic protected him in the violent storm. "I know, right?" Sienna laughed in the same way from behind. The wound on Raizakia's chest was recovering slowly, and the storm of dark power was clearly much weaker than before. It was because of the injury to his dragon heart. Raizakia had narrowly avoided death by releasing polymorph, but the wound he sustained was fatal. To make matters worse, Raizakia knew all too well that his enormous draconic form held almost no advantage over the two small humans. But he had been left with no choice. Raizakia looked down before spreading his jaws wide. Hua! A breath of black poison poured down toward Eugene and Sienna. "Go Hamel," whispered Sienna. Crack! The wing of prominence soared from Eugene's back. The scattering feathers were empowered with Sienna's magic, and Eugene felt Raizakia's magic, which had been dominating the space around them, being destroyed by Sienna. Swoosh! His feathers were allowed to scatter, and simultaneously Eugene disappeared. Dozens of fluttering feathers laid a path for him, and he transformed into a bolt of black lightning, dodging Raizakia's poisonous breath and shooting into the sky. Sienna was left alone, faced with the black dragon's poison breath. It was the same attack that had driven her to the brink of death 2 centuries ago. However, Sienna did not fear this breath attack. Her green eyes did not reflect the pouring darkness. Instead, they captured the light cutting through the darkness. That's right. Light. Sienna Meridian had departed from hell after the war, but her life continued to be hell. Without any light to illuminate her life, it was always dark for her, regardless of where she was. She had trudged on, using memories from a distant past as a candlelight to motivate her. For decades after returning from hell, she had longed for the very light she saw now. That light was the midday sun, the moon in the lightless night, and her guiding stars. It was a light that she had never hoped to see again during her life, a light that was wholly hers. "You can't swallow it," whispered Sienna. The poison, darkness, and the dark power of Raizakia were too weak to devour the light. She raised a whoosh. A giant magic circle appeared in front of her. The same was true for her. The dragon could not swallow her. Raizakia's desperate barrage of breaths could not bypass Sienna's defensive magic. The black dragon hurriedly twisted his head to change the trajectory of the breaths because he could feel death approaching him. However, no matter how many breath attacks he fired, the looming death did not retreat. Raizakia desperately squeezed out every last bit of his dark power in an attempt to stop the impending doom in its path. However, it was a futile attempt. The black flames broke through his defenses effortlessly. Raizakia couldn't even try to polymorph. He couldn't afford the time. Surprisingly, what he first felt was a warm sensation. The light of destruction that pierced his neck was warm, unlike before, and contrary to the ominous color it emitted. He felt the passing of warmth, followed by a sudden coldness. Even the heat of the spewing blood could do nothing against the frigid chill. His vision began to tilt and he had no say. The enormous pool of dark power residing within him began to ebb out uncontrollably. He failed to hold on to even a handful of the dissipating power. Coup. Everything was disappearing. What had he longed for? What had he craved so badly, so much that he chose to become a demon dragon? Was there even such a thing from the beginning? All Raizakia had desired, even at the cost of corrupting himself, was life. He had already lost honor and glory the moment he fell. He had obsessed over the very things because he had lost them. He had attempted to renew what he had lost, and all to protect his arrogant self. Despite his corruption, he had convinced himself to be great, absolute, and noble. Anyone who failed to understand him was insignificant. But now everything lost meaning. He felt everything to have been in vain. Was it like this from the very beginning? He felt no seething anger, and he didn't feel any doubt towards himself either. He had defied his fate by means of corruption once before, but he no longer had the means to resist it anymore. It was already over. The demon dragon had finally reached a dragon-like conclusion the moment his head was cut, and his dragon heart destroyed. "You're not insignificant," Raizakia acknowledged. "Rather, I was the insignificant existence." If he had survived, he could have continued his arrogant life. But now that he was dying, he could no longer be arrogant. The Dragon Lord, whom he had killed with his own hands, and the others who died at the hands of the Demon Kings, had died a dragon. They had died for the world. N0villas.c0m. However, Raizakia's death wasn't one of such honor or glory. The fallen demon dragon was only paying what he owed. His death was a late atonement for his sins. Raizakia laughed without feeling pity at his own pathetic, miserable death. "Could my death be any uglier?" Raizakia gave a long sigh while moving his eyes. He saw Eugene as his vision darkened. He saw the sword of destruction held in Eugene's hand. If only he had died by that light 3 centuries ago. Raizakia closed his eyes with regret.